I'd now like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Born in Jerusalem, grew up in Sweden, he served in the Givati Brigade, became a company commander, and held several positions working with the United Nations peacekeeping forces. He finished his military career as a spokesman for the IDF and is now a fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, an organization we work with quite a bit. Welcome, Colonel Conricus.
Okay, hard acts to follow, Melanie and then Yusuf Haddad, and it's me standing in between you and a break. So I will be brief. I will spare you some of the pyrotechnics that I had in store for you, and I will focus on the bottom line, and I will speak about the things that Nitzana and the team asked me to come and address. So I first want to start by thanking Nitzana and Shurat Adin. I think our acquaintance goes back many years when I was still in the IDF, when I used to brief Shurat Adin missions to Israel. This was more than 10 years ago. Immediately then I recognized Shurat Adin as an organization that I like. Why do I like it? Because they take action. And because they did revolutionary, aggressive activities against those who fund terror, and because they won. And that is very important, and I think that's the mindset that is missing in many parts of the pro-Israeli, pro-Jewish world, and I hope that it will be adopted by others, and that's why I'm very happy to stand before you here today. I'll segue from the excellent words of Melanie, sitting here, and what I will be speaking about is similar to, but it's a different aspect of it. And I'll approach the issue not necessarily from the spiritual aspect, but from the tachlis, military, strategic, political aspect. Now, some of the things that I'm about to say may surprise you, being a former IDF spokesperson, because I'll be taking the focus a little bit away from Israel and zooming out and looking at a global challenge. It's a challenge that Israel has been facing the brunt of for many years, and I think we have more mileage and understanding, but I think it's a challenge that currently is mostly about the West and as it is about Israel. Not to belittle, Iran and its proxies, they were severely damaged by Israel after their combined attack on October the 7th. I think we can all agree that today Iran and its proxies are suffering, have had their military capabilities severely damaged. And when you scan the horizons around Israel, I think we're in a much better military, regional situation than we were before 2 years ago. And that is first and foremost thanks to the bravery, skill, devotion, and battlefield success of the brave men and women who serve in the Israeli Defense Forces and all of the other security organizations, to which we owe. And by the way, they're still fighting. As we sit here, and the title of my talk is The War After the War, they are still fighting on 4 or 5 different fronts, and they don't believe that the war is over, and I will elaborate about that. Now, many pro-Israelis will now seek to move on and to go back to normal, whatever that was before October 7. And now we have a peace deal. Many dream about peace with the Palestinians, and they cheer the end of a 3,000-year conflict. Those of us who have been around this block, we say not so fast. I think that our war with the Iranian proxies is not over, but we have a ceasefire, and it has a presidential seal on it, and significant efforts are being made in order to turn it into reality. So, for the sake of the argument, and since the topic that Nitzana and the team wanted me to speak about is the war after the war, let's just explore the current situation. First and foremost, my main message is that the war isn't over. This is just a milestone. It's a good one and a positive one where our enemies are suffering and we are in a stronger position, but it's just a milestone. Which war am I referring to in the greater sense? I'm referring to the civilizational battle against Islamism. Islamism takes its most violent and obvious form on the ground in the likes of Hamas and ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and the Nusra Front, and so many other organizations that sadly we are aware of their existence. But the more cleverly promoted, the same ideas are more cleverly promoted by the Muslim Brotherhood in the Middle East and around the world, and organizations like the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, OIC. If you would do a poll here, I doubt that more than 10% of you are aware of the OIC, but you should be. Now, this is the war that we face, and I think this is the war that we should now be focusing on. Our war against Hamas was only part of a bigger conflict, of a bigger war. October 7 was a trigger that unleashed dormant and sometimes camouflaged forces and powers. It boosted the Muslim Brotherhood and their satellite organizations, which I will speak about. And you know, I'll share a little bit of my personal story. I don't have a PowerPoint of it, and it's far less imaginative than Yosef's. But I was born in Jerusalem, and I grew up in Malmö, Sweden. So I had the opportunity, kind of first row tickets, to see a Western society allow itself to be challenged and eventually defeated by Islamist forces. The city that I grew up in today isn't really Swedish anymore. They've really lost control of the city. It's dominated by other forces, many different forces, but definitely not Swedish. So I have that perspective, and that is the lens through which I look at things that I'll be speaking about. Now, since October 8th, Islamists have brazenly occupied the streets of many American, Australian, European, and Canadian cities. They're doing it in broad daylight. And the sights from London from just 2 days and 3 days ago are a very sad example of what I'm talking about. Hundreds and if not thousands of Muslims occupying public spaces and deciding what's what and who's who, and conducting mass prayers out in the streets. Why? Because they can. Now, like several blind people, you know the analogy of lots of blindfolded people who are being told to identify an elephant, and each person is feeling a different part of it. Many Westerners are in a similar situation. They're willfully blindfolded, and they're struggling to identify and name the object that they're all touching. So let's describe this green elephant in the room. The first and most important thing that we need to do collectively is to listen. It is to listen what they themselves say. It is to listen to the sermons preached in mosques all around the Western world every Friday. It is to listen to what they say in their various outlets, mostly in Arabic and other non-European languages, but occasionally they also let it slip in English-speaking media. And what they say is very clear. They say that they want to dominate and take control of Western countries, and that they're not shy in achieving it. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 in Egypt, but since then it has morphed and metastasized into a global network of loosely affiliated organizations. It doesn't have a center of gravity. There's no global headquarters of the Muslim Brotherhood, but it has a profound and growing influence. Their modus operandi is to take over institutions, organizations, and eventually societies, entire societies, from the bottom up. And they're doing it cleverly without the blatant use of violence or armed jihad. Their approach is a slow and patient approach. They aim to effect generational change through the ballot, not by the bullet. Through the ballot and not by the bullet, in contrast to jihadi terror organizations that we are more familiar with. One of their goals is to implement Sharia law in every country where they have been allowed in. Many times they came as asylum seekers and refugees from tormented or underdeveloped countries. And the goal is Islamist domination over all others in the countries that they came from, the Muslim world and the Middle East, and in the new homes that they have in the West. Today, these forces are on the rise. They are politically organized and disciplined. They are funded. They have powerful mouthpieces, some of them very eloquent in fluent King's English. They're highly motivated, and perhaps most importantly, and corresponding with what Melanie spoke about before, they feel and know that they are implementing a divine plan. They have no doubt about it. You ask guys from the Muslim Brotherhood, what are you doing? They will say, my plan is from above, and I'm just a messenger and someone who has the good fortune of executing it on the ground. And that's a very important fact. They're willing to endure hardship and to confront opposition. But as of today, if we're frank about it, they're not facing any serious global opposition. It's a free-for-all so far. And that's the war that I'm talking about. Islamists across the West are taking control of labor and student unions, of academic faculties, of various non-profit and so-called humanitarian organizations, civil society organizations all around the world. Many times they disguise themselves as Muslim charities, educational institutes, or welfare organizations with very benign intentions for widows and orphans. On campuses, US and European campuses, we have witnessed the most visible explosion of Islamist takeover since October 7, as some of the other speakers will testify about. What they're doing is that they're eroding elite US and European academic institutions of their excellence, and they're doing it with the help of radical elements within Western society. Islamists are driving anti-Semitism online and in the streets, and they're forcing Jews around the West, around the world, to hide their identity and beliefs out of fear of reprisals, bullying, and violence. They, the Islamists, have understood that unlike in business and in other merit-based organizations where you have to be excellent in order to be successful, they've understood that local, state, and federal offices can be won by persistent political operations. They're already in control of various American cities and local councils, and they're on the rise, including in New York City. In Europe, the situation is far worse and much more advanced. And if Americans want to see where the trends are going, they should look at Europe. The worst example, arguably, is probably, or the worst example of Islamist takeover of a country is unfolding before our eyes in the UK. Dozens of local councils today, elected officials, are run by outspoken Islamists who pledge loyalty to the Ummah, the Islamic nation, not to Queen and country or King and country, not to the UK, not to the flag, but to the Islamic nation, and they say it in their languages. And coming back to the beginning, we only have to listen to what they say. Muslim voter participation in elections all across the West, and I've done the number crunching, and I've looked at the different countries, and believe me, without going into details, Muslim voter participation is far higher than the average voter turnout in any country. Why? They know that turnout is key. And again, it's about ballots, not about bullets. One office after the other, the aim is to use the democratic process to take control of enough organizations and centers of power, and then to tip the scales entirely. Now, this rings familiar from history. We've seen it done before by other extremist ideologies, and I don't think that we should be fooled by today's Islamists. Make no mistake, the means and the ways of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, they differ from those of Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and others, but the goal is identical. One approach is blatant and obvious, it's brutal, and it triggers a counter response, while the other is subtle. it's patient, and it is camouflaged. That's why this war is so dangerous. So after all this, you ask yourselves, okay, so what should we be doing? What's to do about it? Well, there is a lot that we can and should be doing. We, by the way, being pro-Israelis, Jews, who don't want to be subjugated and face the most blunt attacks of Muslim Brotherhood and terror organizations, but also we in the sense of Western civilization, those who care about Western civilization. First and foremost, we have to realize that we are still and currently at war, and that it's going to be a long one. Second is to identify the challenge, name it, and collectively decide to fight back. Without that happening, nothing of some substance is going to happen. What's the threat? Islamism and its quest for global domination. That is the threat. And it comes in different shapes and sizes, and it's difficult sometimes to understand what it is, but that threat, that specific threat, Islamism and its quest for global dominance, must be met with resolve and clarity. Jews shouldn't be fighting this battle alone. We should rally allies, and we should build coalitions. Many nations, people, their leaders, elected officials, etc., I think they need to understand that Israel is the off-Broadway show. The real show, the real Broadway, from a Muslim Islamist perspective, is their countries. It's the West. And like so many other times in history where Israel faces the early warnings, the early waves of Islamist attacks, this is the same situation. Education here is key. Israelis and Westerners, Muslims around the world, all need to be educated. I think we need to, in Israel, we need to focus on educating Arabs. We need to prevent their radicalization. A colleague of mine, Christian Egyptian at FDD, called Miriam Wahba, she wrote an excellent piece about the strength of the propaganda machine of the Muslim Brotherhood and the effect that it has on Arabic and Muslim people around the world. I suggest you read it. Very, very interesting. And it really underscores the importance of countering that radicalization amongst people like what Yusuf spoke about before, the 50-50s. Many Muslims aren't already set in their minds that they want to dominate the world and become part of the Muslim Brotherhood. But if we allow the Muslim Brotherhood to educate them, that is where they will go. As a more local example, in Gaza, which is very relevant today, and it's really an action item that we should be on, if we wish to prevent the establishment of another radical Islamist entity in Gaza after Hamas is hopefully deprived of power, then our goal should be to take education out of the hands of UNRWA. If UNRWA, I think it's in our interest, and it'll be a very important litmus test. We need to make sure that their curriculum of hate, anti-Semitism, and terror indoctrination will not radicalize another generation of Gazan children. And it's part of the same battle. We need to educate Jews and Christians about the threat, how to fight it, without, and this is very important, tripping the alarms of Islamophobia. This isn't about hating Muslims as equal human beings with right of religion and practice and freedom of speech. This is against weaponized Islamism that threatens the very societies that we live in. We need to legislate against Islamist behavior and attempts to take control over different organizations. Now, these attempts, as I said before, they're not blunt. They may disguise themselves as welfare, education, freedom of speech, social and religious services. This is tricky, but it's absolutely necessary to confront. And in the real world, and this is happening, we need to sanction and designate, personally and institutionally, the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates as terror organizations. Wherever we can prove, and we can, the direct ties between a Muslim Brotherhood entity in a country and known terror activists, they need to be listed, and the organization that supports them needs to be listed and sanctioned. The FDD just released a memo, actually today, with very clear evidence out there in the open. You just have to look a while and have the correct tools to study, and you will find direct ties between Muslim Brotherhood institutions, offices, all across the Middle East, in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Qatar, Sudan, and Yemen. And there are many others. And if you just remove the veil a little bit of welfare and religious services, you dig a bit deeper, you will find the same people that are part of terrorist organizations and active in terror organizations that are also affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. At the FDD, we assess that the designation of the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization by the Trump administration is imminent, and of course we welcome it. Furthermore, we need to confront and expose state supporters of Islamism like Turkey and Qatar. And we need to demand accountability of those countries, definitely not be positive and friendly and fuzzy with them. I think we need to continue the excellent work by Shurat ad-Din and other organizations to bankrupt the supporters of terror by lawfare, to hold states accountable for their support of Islamism, to fight online and campus radicalism, and UN institutional complicity in terror. I think we must also fight the battle of narratives, which is a battle that I see myself fighting. We have to fight it for the hearts and minds of good people around the world. Sadly, I say this with great regret, Israel isn't yet really fighting this battle well. And I think that as long as we will continue to not fight this battle, we will suffer the consequences of it. I think that we need to apply the same creativity, audacity, bravery, and skills that we apply on the battlefield, the real battlefield against our enemies, and we see the excellent results of it. The same thinking, the same mindset, the same resources need to be applied in the battle of the narratives. Now, as an example, if Israel only allocated 2% of our vast intel capabilities and earmarked these 2% of intel products for narrative or media warfare, I think that would equip freedom fighters, defenders of democracy, good people around the world with data and information, and it would really harm our enemies. And whenever Israel has done it, and done it well, it has had excellent outcomes. Think about the time when Israel released information, evidence of 12 UNRWA members who were also Hamas members, who also participated actively in the atrocities of October the 7th. That led to immediate freezing of funds. Many countries froze funding for UNRWA. Some of those countries who had a national tradition of contributing to UNRWA haven't even returned to giving UNRWA money because they were shaken by what they saw, and they saw that thanks to Israeli intelligence. But that was a one-off, and what we don't do is a systemic effort, and that is really what is needed. Speaking about systemic efforts, Qatar. Qatar needs to be forced by the US to make a clear decision. You're either part of the forces of moderation and progress, or you face the consequences of supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and peddling Hamas and Islamist propaganda. There shouldn't be any middle ground, no matter the business interest at stake. Now, this has not yet happened, and while Al Jazeera has done some cosmetic adjustments and they shuffled a bit of their leadership around, Al Jazeera is still a global mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood, for Hamas, for radical Islam, and its quest for global domination. And towards the end, I'd like to say that we have to fight political correctness. We have to redraw because it doesn't serve a purpose. Political correctness limits our ability to fight back, and it serves the ability of the other side to undermine our societies. So we have to fight political correctness. We have to redraw the political battle lines. We have to demand of law enforcement and organizations around the world equal enforcement and protection of free speech. We know which side is being silenced. We know which side is being told to not be present when the other side is protesting. It isn't the Islamists. And I think, for example, we should adopt policies that Arab countries have in place against the Muslim Brotherhood and against Al Jazeera. In Saudi Arabia, and I'm sure you know this, in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE, and in Morocco, Al Jazeera is banned, totally banned. You cannot consume any of their content, not online and definitely not broadcast on satellite. Same thing about the Muslim Brotherhood. And I ask myself, if Muslim and Arab countries can do it, they can outlaw people from their own religion. And these are Muslim Arab countries who are proud of their Muslim and their Arabic heritage. If they can do it, why can't the West? I think we need to hold elected officials and media personalities accountable for their support of Muslim Brotherhood ideology and subversion. We need to expose and force them, have them on the offensive, on the back foot, and force them to explain their financial and ideological ties with Islamist entities. Think about how absurd is it that a mouthpiece for the Muslim Brotherhood and a very prolific whitewasher of Hamas propaganda, someone like Mehdi Hassan, was first awarded a US visa and a path to US citizenship, which he has today, because of the fact that he was an Al Jazeera reporter working in the US. How absurd is that? And I think that's a situation that definitely needs to be revised. Lastly, we need to vote. We need to participate in the democratic process at local, state, regional, and federal levels. And we need to do it against attempts by Islamists, some of them in disguise, some of them in plain view. We need to influence others, friends, family, and people that are in the 50-50 group, to vote and become politically active in defense of democracy, in defense of Western Christian and Jewish values, and against the forces of Islamism. And remember, the other side understands that turnout is key. With swift, focused, brave, and sharp actions, I think we can still roll back and undo the global advances of Islamism. I don't think that it is a fait accompli, something that we just have to accept. Europe is indeed in poor shape and in the gravest danger, but I think even Europe can still be saved. And I see early signs in various Western countries, European countries, of people starting to wake up and weaponize themselves spiritually, politically, and that's a good thing. But action is needed now. I think Israel has a more clear-eyed approach, because for us it's not some elusive concept. We can see and feel Islamism very vividly in all of the organizations that we fight and defeat. And after October 7 and its aftermath, I think Israelis are far less tolerant of Western political correctness. We are far less tolerant about Islamism or jihad against us, and we're much more clear-eyed about the situation. Israelis are fighting, and I think that we will defeat these local enemies, just like we have defeated the others that we've spoken about before. It's the rest of the world that I'm more worried about. And as I said before, the time for action is now, because the real war after the small war, our war against Hamas and the Iranian proxies, it continues, and it will last, and it will continue, and it needs to end, when it needs to be fought, and end with one side victorious, and that is our side. So I thank you very much.